Several assailants burst into a large concert hall in Moscow on Friday when hundreds were settled into a concert hall to watch a performance. Now, men reportedly wearing combat uniforms opened fire, shooting at the crowds, killing at least 60 people and injuring at least 145 others. One suspect has even reportedly been detained. Blasts were then heard post the shooting. Crocus Hall, the venue where the attack occurred, was even set ablaze. Helicopters were even flown in to douse these flames. The roof had also partially collapsed. It's the deadliest attack on Russian soil in recent years. ISIS has claimed responsibility in a message posted on Telegram. This is yet to be verified. This attack comes days after Russia's President Vladimir Putin won the elections in a landslide victory, and the Kremlin is constantly updating Putin. The United States has also said it had informed Russia about a planned attack. Meanwhile, Ukraine has categorically rejected allegations that they were involved in this attack, and condemnations are pouring in from around the world in light of this tragedy. And in New Delhi, the Russian flag is flying half-mast at the embassy. Now, we want to welcome our guests to this broadcast. We have Mr. Suresh Goyal, a former ambassador, joining us. We also have Major General Gigi Dwivedi, a foreign affairs expert, joining us. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss this very important topic, especially after a terrorist attack has occurred. Before we come to you, though, we're going to listen into some important statements that have come in after the attack.
我刚刚就是在大概是那个位置，就是在商场的西边。 然后呢，我就听到了有那个大概是鞭炮一样的声音，但是我当时还不知道发生了什么。然后我就看到很多人在跑，然后他们就告诉我那边那个用俄语就是告诉我说开枪了什么的，但是我还是不知道发生了什么事情，所以我现在就是跟着第一批来的人撤到了这个商场西边的这个山坡上，所以我们现在大概是在这个离商场大概有700米的位置上，所以现在应该是一个比较安全的一个状态。
Да, произошла трагедия. Мы здесь в Крокусе работают пожарные. Площадь возгорания очень заметная. Все остальное будет понятно после окончания работ пожарных и, соответственно...
The images are just horrible and just hard to watch, and our thoughts obviously are going to be with the victims of this terrible, terrible shooting attack. The State Department, our embassy there, put out a notice to all Americans in Moscow to avoid any large gathering, concerts, obviously shopping malls, anything like that, just for their own safety. They should stay put where they are and stay plugged into the State Department for any additional updates and information.
All right, Mr. Goyal, we're going to be coming to you first. Remember, Mr. Goyal is a former ambassador. What I wanted to ask you is, the United States has come out to say that they had warned Russia of a planned attack. What typically happens if one nation warns another nation of a planned attack? What is the protocol? What does the warned nation do in response to that information?
Actually, there is no fixed protocol in that sense that if a nation has informed or given some information to the other nation, this is what happens. These are all basically well-established procedures and the way the nations behave, depending upon the kind of faith and the trust that exists between the two. There is a lot of misinformation. And therefore, whenever such informations come to any agency, from whichever source, there is an evaluation of its credibility and then the action taken on the basis of the assessment on the credibility of that information. Now, I heard maybe I'm quite wrong, but Russia denied receiving such information from the USA. Maybe later they accepted it. But the point is that whenever such information comes, it's taken very, very seriously by agencies, and they do act upon the information in terms of assessing and evaluating it. One thing that you should keep in mind is that even if the information comes, timing, how, where, and what kind of the weapons they're going to use, ammunition, there is so much unknown that on the basis of that information, to plan a counter action is often very, very difficult, really. Therefore, rather than in this particular case saying that Russia should have done this, USA should have done that, I think we should take it as a face value as it is, that it is a terrorist attack and there should be a proper procedure on ground internationally agreement on how to deal with these acts of international terrorism. Aisha.
Absolutely. A very interesting point that you raised there, that there should be a proper procedure to deal with matters like this. Major General Dwivedi, I need to come to you now. You are a foreign affairs expert. What I wanted to ask you is more in context of what's been happening in Russia, not just right now, but also in the past. After Wagner chief Prigozhin's attack in Russia, now this terror attack has taken place in the capital itself, in Moscow. What kind of security challenges do you think Russia is facing? And do you think that these events would have taken place had Russia not currently been engaged in a war?
Well, Aisha, first and foremost, I think this act is a very dastardly act and it must be condemned and denounced in strongest possible language.
Absolutely.
And our sympathies, condolences go to the aggrieved families. Having operated in almost all type of insurgencies in India, I can give you, and of course, as a global perspective, I can give you a couple of very subtle indications. First and foremost, terrorist acts are undertaken to have a deep impact on the psyche of the nation or on the psyche of the dispensation or the government. So therefore, this act is directly, I think, to shake up the dispensation in Russia and possibly directly against the head of the state, that is President Putin. But then there are always reasons why these attacks are taken. First and foremost, we need to understand as to what is ISIS-K, because it is the Khorasan, that is the Afghan branch of ISIS, which came into being in 2014. And it is known to be a very, very, I would say, cruel organization. And it has been anti-Putin for the last about 2 to 3 years, because President Putin has directly gone into Syria, and the operations which are supporting Bashir Assad government are against the ISIS. So therefore, ISIS is hurt. Secondly, ISIS also identifies itself with the Central Asian Republic groups, which also feel aggrieved because they feel that President Putin and his government is suppressing the Islamic organization, the Islamic religion. So therefore, they have a grouse. And it is not the first time ISIS has undertaken such attacks. Even in 2 years back, they had undertaken a similar attack in Russia. So therefore, the point I'm trying to make is it's a terrorist act. It is directed against the Russian government and especially against Mr. Putin to give a very strong message that their anti-Islamic activities, their activities to harm the interest of ISIS must cease forthwith. That's, I think, the message that has been given to the government and to the Russian dispensation. Aisha.
Absolutely. Major General, thank you so much for that expert analysis. Do stay with us. We'll come back to you. Mr. Goel, I want to come back to you to ask you, you've worked extensively on matters pertaining to peace and security. How does a society, in this case Russia's society, heal from a tragedy like this? How do you think this terror attack has impacted the psyche of Putin's Russia?
Aisha, very difficult, really. There could be any amount of rehabilitation measures, there could be any amount of efforts made by the civil society and the government. But the healing is very difficult, not just because of what happened, but the scar it leaves on the minds of the people who are involved. Now, there are about 6,000 people in an auditorium who have gone to basically enjoy the evening with a performance, and suddenly somebody comes in and begins to shoot at them, killing 60 people. I think essentially that is the idea of the terrorism acts, because they leave the scar on the minds of people, which make it difficult for the government to operate. 9/11, September attacks in Mumbai in India, the basic objective was to really create terror in the mind of people. And therefore, to my mind, really, it's not a question of healing the wounds or healing the scar, but there has to be the severest possible punishment for those who perpetrate such crimes. And therefore, I would say the first step to take would be that any action by any terrorist organization which engages in wanton killing of civilians, uninvolved civilians, innocent civilians, if they're caught, once they're caught, they must be punished most severely with whatever is the most ultimate punishment, even including death if necessary, because it has to have a deterrence value. Healing will come afterwards. Aisha.
All right, that's also well said. Do stay with us. Major General, I want to come back to you to ask you something. You were just talking about the Islamic State taking responsibility for the attack, particularly a different branch of it, which is the Afghan branch, ISIS-K. They've claimed responsibility for it. Of course, that is yet to be verified because they've reportedly said it on Telegram. But even so, if and when confirmed, how do you think Russia is going to respond to this attack?
Well, Aisha, first and foremost, response to terrorist attack is not a simple one because it has a lot of complications. First and foremost,
Absolutely.
to identify the terrorists, where they operated from, who is harboring them, what is the organization, because they build up their whole structure over a period of time. So they'll have to go to the nitty-gritties and see where that the trail leads to, because after all, terrorists operate because of some kind of local support, and also they have external support. That is point number one. Second point is that this is going to cause a fear of psychosis among the public, because that's the whole aim of the test. So the government will have to assure the people that, well, this could be one of them, but this will not be allowed to take place again. So therefore, they'll have to tighten up the security across the board. And thirdly, to defeat terrorism, you have to go to the roots from where it is emanating. How it is that, what is the supply chain? What is the chain that is operating upon? And that will be the third challenge. But my last point is that, see, terrorism is a global phenomenon. On this, the globe has to come together. But unfortunately, ironically, the terrorism has not been defined. The globe has a different lens to view terrorism. And India is a case in point. I think we have been affected by this intensely, but globe only realized terrorism when 9/11 took place. So this has to be a global movement. But all I can say in nutshell is, for Russia, it's a tough time. They'll have to go for the terrorists. They have to convince their public that this could be one time, but it's not be allowed to be repeated. And it's going to take time before the fear of psychosis is diluted or removed from the general public state of mind. Aisha.
Absolutely. Major General G.G. Dwivedi, a foreign affairs expert, thank you so much for joining us. We'd also like to thank Suresh Goel, a former ambassador, for joining us. Gentlemen, thank you for your expert analysis and for giving us your perspectives on this very tragic incident that's taken place in Russia.